Three Lives, Three Worlds. The Pillow Book. Upper volume. Original work by Tangki Gongzi. English translation, Hamster 428. English editing, Rock Harlequin, Joanna Kuang. Chapter 6. Fengju knew the beginning of this love tale. At that time, Jihan's and her fate hadn't yet intertwined with each other. On that day 300 years ago, when divine radiance broke out of Mount Fuyu, Dong Hua stepped out of the wicked lotus sphere with valiant force. The first thing he did wasn't to look for Yan Chaiwu, but instead to bring her back to Taichan Palace. On the open 13th sky under dense shades of the sal trees, dozens of prostrated elders lined the way from the celestial entrance to the palace gate to await their punishment for failing to protect the soul-locking jade. Dong Hua walked on and entered the palace amid expanses of blue clouds and Buddhist chants. No one dared to raise his head, each knew the guilt he carried. Many of them were brave warriors from the dawn of time, whose faces Fengju recognized from her school books. Dong Hua entrusted her to Zonglin, his most trusted steward in Taichan Palace. But Fengju didn't want someone else to tend to her. In her mind, Dong Hua was the best at changing her bandage, cleansing her wound, and brushing her fur. She clung onto his robe with her tiny claws and refused to let him go. Dong Hua held her an arm length away. Her short legs couldn't reach him no matter how hard she tried. She finally gave up as her face plopped gloomily. The two daring maidservants who stood nearby giggled in amusement. Fengju glared at them angrily. Even Dong Hua's cold eyes beamed a rare smile at this time. He lifted her up and laid her on the bed, then petted her head. Fengju thought he would indulge her again, so she started to climb back into his robe, but Dong Hua by this time had drawn a circle around her, encasing her inside a force field. "This baby fox is very playful," he told the servants. "Take good care of it. Don't let it run around lest its leg injury gets worse." Fengju still wanted to come along. She used her crybaby tactic again and pretended to wipe tears from her eyes. He leaned against the windowsill to observe her. "I enjoy making others cry. Why don't you cry louder?" Her cries immediately halted in her throat. Once she stopped, he stepped closer and stroked her head. "Be good and listen to Zonglin. I'll come back for you once I take care of everything." She stared up at him, and at long last finally nodded in defeat. Fengju sighed. Everything that happened seemed like yesterday. Several days went by but Dong Hua didn't come back for her. In the end she couldn't wait anymore and tricked Zonglin into removing the force field. On her way to look for Dong Hua, she met Siming at the South Heaven Gate. In the past, she hadn't thought anything significant could happen in those few days, but now that centuries had passed, she learned from listening to Yan Chaiwu that there had been quite a few things which transpired, and they were all significant. This was the latter half of the story between herself, Dong Hua, and Jihan that she hadn't known before. In the days Dong Hua went missing, he had gone to look for warrior Xiao Yan for another duel. Warrior Xiao Yan glossed over this event with careful screening and pruning. Mr. Yan wiped his nose and concluded, after the fight, he should have scrammed back to where he came from. For what reason did he wander around Mount Beishui? Fengju wore a large leaf she found by the cliffside to keep the blistering sun out. She answered Xiao Yan, maybe he had time left after the fight, so he went to Mount Beishui looking for the long Nao plant and the blue Her words hit a touchy spot in warrior Xiao Yan's sensitive heart. His angry and hurt eyes pushed back the word lotus from coming out of Fengju's mouth. Look at my strapping body. Am I a chum in your eyes? How could he go sightseeing after a fight with me? Fengju gamely looked back at Xiao Yan. She calmly fixed the leaf atop her head and replied, "Of course not. What I meant was, maybe he went to Mount Beishui looking for herbs to treat his wounds." Warrior Xiao Yan seemed to like this explanation enough. He nodded in all seriousness. "You're right. I's face had to have gone to Mount Beishui for healing herbs." He then went on, "If not, there would not be the saying heaven is blind." At that same time, Jihan also came to Mount Beishui. Just as Fengju said, Dong Hua's trip to Mount Beishui was indeed to look for the two holy ingredients for a magical incense. In the marsh, there lived a blue lotus species and the parasitic long nao plant which survived on it. They're 10,000 years in age and are together a wonder of Mount Beishui. Because these two plants depended on each other to live, there was a wooden scent in the lotus while there was a lotus fragrance in the wood. Countless incense-making monks had risked the journey to come here in search of them. There were risks because the topography of the mountain was rather precarious. The marsh was also home to a vicious water serpent. In her childhood, Fengju had entertained the wish of subduing it into a domesticated pet. When Dong Hua returned and casually took out a pouch of dried blue lotus and some long nao resin, she knew the water serpent she once wanted was likely toast. As for Jihan's trip to Mount Beishui, that involved a secret of the demon clan. The demon clan had 7 branches. Suyang, Jihan's brother, was the lord of the Red Branch. Ever since Jihan was still a child, her brother had instructed a personal bodyguard for her. He had a clever and beautiful countenance despite being lowborn, earning adoration from the clan elders. Even Dowager Queen Wang, who lived deep in the solitary inner palace, held a special fondness for him. It was such that Suyang didn't feel it right for that handsome of a bodyguard to serve Jihan. When he wanted to pick someone less pretty, however, the first person to oppose was their very own mother. Dowager Queen Wang cried up a scene and eventually threatened to take her own life. Jihan, who was still young, stood by crying along without knowing why. Minsu, the young bodyguard, pulled on his sleeve innocently and pleaded, "Your Majesty, you've made the Dowager Queen cry. Console her quickly." Flummoxed, Suyang had to give up. The older Minsu grew, the prettier he became. The more Suyang looked at him, the more wrong the kid had seemed. When they had meals, he didn't touch the nutritious parsley and eggplant. Suyang frowned, this was not good. When he wore his pale blue robe, he looked as dainty as a leek. Jihan sidled closer to compliment him. Suyang frowned, this was not good. When he practiced fencing in the garden, he didn't have a towel with him. What if he caught a cold and couldn't take care of Jihan? Suyang frowned, this was not good. His horse was unhealthy these days. How would it travel a long distance if Jihan needed him to run an errand? Suyang frowned, this was not good. Thus Suyang decreed 4 edicts at once. First, everyone had to eat parsley and eggplant at each meal. Second, no one could wear pale blue inside the palace. Third, everyone had to carry a towel to sword practice if he didn't want to be severely punished. Fourth, there would be a royal stable and one may borrow a horse if one's horse was sick. Sure enough, Minsu eagerly came to borrow a horse the moment the stable was set up. Furthermore, he had been eating his greens these days and his once dainty body became much sturdier. Su Yang was pleased. Just for the sake of his little sister, he had had to do so much. Being one of the 7 demon lords, Su Yang's responsibilities were overwhelming. Yet now he had to add his sister and her handsome bodyguard onto his long list of burdens. How much did Minsu speak to Jihun today? Was it a few lines more than yesterday? What was the closest proximity between Minsu and Jihun? Wasn't it an inch closer than the day before? Each and every detail gave him headaches. Moreover, Su Yang's eyes could not help but follow Minsu whenever he was around to see whether the good-looking brat was treating his sister within boundaries or not. But by the time he sat down with the clan elders to discuss Jihun's marriage, and decided to send her to Donghua Daijun's Taichan Palace, not one sign of romance between the two of them as had been imagined had surfaced. For some reason, he felt a little disappointed, but it was also the first time after many years he felt Minsu was perhaps quite good. His fluttering lashes when he lowered his eyes were rather lovable. From then on, his words and demeanor toward Minsu became markedly gentler. But for some reason, thereafter, he often saw Minsu daydreaming by himself in the garden. On several occasions, Minsu didn't even notice Su Yang was standing in front of him. And when he did, he would dash away like a rabbit before Su Yang could get a word in. Once, he had been extremely curious. When Minsu wanted to flee again, he grabbed onto his collar to pull him back. Unexpectedly, the little brat even employed the molting method of the cicadas to flee from him, leaving behind a roomy robe in his hand. Su Yang held the robe as he remained rooted for a length of time. He didn't see Minsu for days after. He only saw once a corner of a robe from afar which resembled Minsu's. At a closer look it was gone. Su Yang suspected his eyesight was worsening as of late. Su Yang had always paid attention to health and fitness since he was young. One day while taking a walk in the garden after lunch, he saw a figure resembling Minsu in the far distance by the lotus pond. He tiptoed over and sure enough, it was he, wearing a green robe and hunching over a boulder like a green squash doodling something. He appeared both concentrated and earnest. Su Yang knew Minsu had never liked writing ever since he was a child. At this age, he barely knew a few hundred words. What could he possibly even be writing? It was quite a curious thing. He quietly pondered for a while, then decided to lurk behind him to see what he was up to. Lotus scent wafted in the cold air. Half of the parchment was covered in sloppy handwriting. The words seemed to string together to say, "How poetic, this rainy night. I stay awake longing for your sight." Being inexperienced, Su Yang could still tell this was a love poem. But the top wasn't addressed to anyone. It was hard to guess whom it was for. Su Yang swiftly snatched the parchment from the marble table. Minsu looked up from his trance and blushed deep red. He reached his hand out to grab it back, but it was too late. The light breeze curled a corner of the paper up. Su Yang had to guess at each word with difficulty and at length read aloud 2 lines. "Bright moonbeams draped this lonely cell. I toss and turn to no avail." He paused to ask, "Who is this written for?" Minsu was usually as animated as an infant monkey. But this time he kept his face glued to the ground, his ears burning red as he stood frozen on the spot. Comprehension suddenly dawned on Su Yang. For Jihan. Minso glanced up at him in surprise and quickly lowered his head again. Su Yang continued standing in front of him. Seeing his implicitly concurring look, he was slowly overcome with fury. This little bodyguard dared to have feelings for his little sister, yet he never left any traces behind. He thought to himself, was it because there was no obstacles to rouse him before, but now that he had arranged for Jihan one of the best marriages in the world, it had caused the brat to let shown his hidden feelings? This appearance of his really looked as though he could no longer contain his feelings for Jihan, so he finally wrote a love poem for her. Of course, Jihan was a lovable princess, and perfectly deserving of this poem. Su Yang ruminated in annoyance for a while, but he did not let it surface on his face. At length, he growled and turned to leave. 2 days later, the duel between Yan Chaiwu and Dong Hua on Mount Fuyu made news all over the peaceful Southland. Guilt led Jihan to sneak away in the middle of a rainy night to stop the two of them. On the night Jihan went away, several guards snuck into Minsu's room and neatly dragged him out of the palace gates while he was still lying unsuspecting and fully clothed. At that moment, Su Yang arranged a chess game by the water glass. He thought of his next move whilst he anxiously viewed the situation in the water glass. He saw that Minsu did not docilely let the guards tie him up at first, instead swiftly drawing the sword at his bed to block the sentry. But when the chief guard hesitantly told him, "His Majesty ordered you banished to Mount Beishui to reflect on your transgression," the sword in his hand clashed onto the floor. After he was tied up, Su Yang heard him sadly asked, "I know my offense is great, but are you sure His Majesty meant Mount Beishui?" The chief guard sighed, "His Majesty indeed said Mount Beishui." Minsu bowed his head in silence after hearing the confirmation. From that angle, Su Yang couldn't see Minsu's expression. Only when they brought him away from Jihan's quarters did he see the brat suddenly raise his head to turn and look at Chihong Hall, Su Yang's daily workplace. His pale face was drained, yet his eyes were completely lucid. Su Yang's decision to imprison Minsu at Mount Beishui was arrived at after much deliberation. Across the expansive terrain in the world, the largest land mass was the Southland, which was ruled by the demons. Next was the Westland, ruled by the ghouls. The largest domain among countries such as the Qingkai Kingdom of the Nine-tailed White Foxes, or bordering regions such as the southeast, northeast, southwest, and northwest areas, was the East Mainland. And even it was only as large as the Southland. The Heaven Clan's territory was a bit vaster. The 36 celestial skies and the 4 seas in addition to the Northland were all under their jurisdiction. Then again, they did have a greater population. Additionally, there was also an influx from the mortal realm of those who aspired for divinity joining the Heaven Clan each year. The Heaven Clan's burden also therefore multiplied. Nevertheless, the Demon Clan by their ancestors' grace held onto the largest continental piece among the 8 land masses. But within their extensive territory were also countless perilous locations. Mount Beishui was the most frightening of all. In the locals' minds, it was a mountain with no way out. Vertical cliffs erected on all 4 sides. Toxic air surrounded the perimeter year-round. Plants native to this region were mostly poisonous. Wild beasts were hostile due to the extreme conditions. There was a way to die for every personal taste. To be lost in there was akin to being lost in a suicidal heaven. This was why it hadn't been without reasons that Minsu's expression darkened when he heard Su Yang wanted to imprison him on Mount Baishui. It was all the same where he stayed to reflect on his transgression. Su Yang chose Mount Baishui firstly to split Jihan and Minsu apart. He thought if Minsu mustered up enough courage to confess to Jihan, being kind and naive, Jihan might actually accept him. That would only cause humiliation to the royal family. Secondly, if Minsu was brought to Mount Baishui, Jihan would not be able to go to him even with their childhood friendship. She would probably come to look for him and cry up a scene, but it didn't matter. He only had one strategy, and that was to delay the situation until Jihan could smoothly wed Dong Hua. He'd release Minsu at that time. Besides, Minsu had always had the unique constitution of being immune to all sorts of poisons. And while there were many treacherous beasts inhabiting Mount Baishui, if he couldn't handle them, he wasn't worthy of being the princess's bodyguard. With these thoughts, Su Yang casually ordered for Minsu to be brought to Mount Baishui. Behind the water glass surface, Minsu's last glance in this direction caused the chess piece in Su Yang's hand to drop onto the table and roll down the ground. He recognized a bewildered look in those tranquil eyes. Su Yang picked up the stone and thought, he had never left Danling Palace his entire life. It wasn't a bad idea to let him train on Mount Baishui. But what if Minsu were to never return again? This never crossed his mind. The night Jihan returned from Mount Fuyu, the Southland was showered in a deluge of rain. Minsu's banishment to Mount Baishui unsurprisingly reached Jihan's ears. Su Yang sat inside Chihong Hall and waited for his sister to come harangue him. But his tea was long emptied and still there was no sight of her. Not until Jihan's maidservant came running to him in the morning did he find out his sister had disappeared during the night. Naturally, Jihan went to Mount Baishui to save Minsu. His plan would have been perfect had he not forgotten his sister's righteousness. The perilous route leading to the mountaintop became the destiny which led Jihan to Donghua Daijun at the Whitewater Marsh. Rain poured down ceaselessly for several days as though the heavenly river was suddenly turned upside down. But for the red lotuses in Danling Palace, it was a rare chance to drink up heavenly water. They opened gloriously like red lanterns, offering a pleasant sight to the eyes. Troop after troop was sent away, disturbing even the Dowager Queen in the inner chambers, but still there was no news. Dowager Queen Wang's crying ability did not deteriorate with age. Each mealtime she came to Su Yang and wept for Jihan exactly on the hour. The entire palace was turned topsy-turvy over the missing princess. Past noon that day, just as Su Yang ordered for the one-winged snow lion to be brought to him so he could ride out to Mount Baishui, Dong Hua in his purple robe suddenly appeared in front of Danling Gong, carrying an unconscious Jihan in his arms. Few from the demon clan thought they would ever get to meet the world's legendary former sovereign, and thus, that day remained vividly clear in their memory even till now. The entire sky was overcast under grey clouds. Rain started to lessen, and eventually there remained only a light sprinkle. The 10-mile-long expanse in front of the palace gate was blanketed under a carpet of red lotuses, their radiance emanating to every corner. A handsome silver-haired gentleman majestically rode off the cloud and landed on ground. Their dark energy not able to withstand the divine nimbus, the red lotuses slowly closed their petals, leaving a wide path of green pasture for his holy feet to step forward. Jihan with her eyes closed shut was held in Dong Hua's arms. Her loosened long hair flowed down like a black waterfall around her pale face. She was extremely weak. Her 2 arms circled around his neck. Her body was covered underneath his robe, showing only her bare ivory ankles. On them were ominous drops of scarlet blood. What happened those 2 nights on Mount Baishui, no one in this world besides Donghua, Jihan, and perhaps the unlucky water serpent really knew. What was known was that Donghua stayed another day in Danling Palace until Jihan regained consciousness. After waking up, she attached herself to Donghua like a chick to her mother hen. Not once did she mention Minsu. Su Yang was glad to find that his decision to send Minsu to Mount Baishui turned out to be a wise decision. Although his younger sister was put into danger, she was given an opportunity to fall in love with Donghua. It was a brilliant move on the chessboard if he may say so himself. On the 3rd day, as Donghua was preparing to leave Danling Palace, Su Yang invited him over for tea. After 1 round of tea, Su Yang proposed to send Jihan to Taichan Palace 3 days later, forever tying the 2 clans in alliance. Donghua agreed. At this point in the story, Yan Chaiwu sighed and began to mutter. He was muttering that if he wasn't so severely injured, he would have prevented Jihan from going to Mount Baishui. If that had been the case, Donghua wouldn't be a part of this story, and he and Jihan would have been married. The heavens were momentarily blinded, so on and so forth. The leaf Fengju wore on her head had started to shrivel due to the heat. Underneath, she tiredly asked Yan Chaiwu, "How do you know for certain Donghua loved Jihan? What if there's something he couldn't say?" Xiao Yan clenched his fists. His knuckles cracked as he snarled, he wouldn't dare. With the same furor he continued, "Jihan is pure and chaste. She's elegant and noble. Fish forget to swim, birds forget to fly at the sight of her. The moon is dim, the flowers humbled next to her. She's simply too beautiful for words. What is so difficult for a man to love her?" He snarled again, showing his even white teeth. "He does not deserve being called a man." Yan Chaiwu was an uncouth fellow, yet he managed to say 5 idioms in a row, surprising Fengju greatly. At the same time, she wanted to refute on the fact that his heart was only occupied with Jihan, but she stopped herself. She quietly rearranged the shriveled-up leaf above her head. Noticing Fengju's doubtful expression, Yan Chaiwu sighed, "I know what you're thinking. Girls like to think they're the only one worthy of the ones they admire, the rest are but meaningless trifles." Xiao Yan was sincere. "You don't think Ice Face likes Jihan, this I can understand, because I also used to think Jihan didn't like Ice Face." He sighed morosely again. But they were alone together for 2 nights. Just think. Oi, even I don't want to think about it. Yet the truth remains that there have been so many couples who started out hating each other and still ended up falling for one another once they're trapped together in close proximity. The despondent fellow sighed and sighed again. Let's step back and think, if Ice Face didn't truly love Jihan, why did he agree to marry her? If he didn't want to, who from your Heaven clan can really force him? Fengju thought Xiao Yan's words made sense. She sadly adjusted the leaf on her head and, after a while, tilted her face to ask Yan Chaiwu, "But I know," she coughed, "I heard when they parted ways at the Lotus Sphere, Jihan asked Donghua to let her have the fox they found there. Didn't Donghua refuse? If he had liked Jihan, why would he be so petty?" This Yan Chaiwu interrupted her, "What do you know? It was a trick." He then explained to her, "If you like Ice Face, you'd want to see him again. Then let me ask you, what's the best way to do that?" Not waiting for her reply, Xiao Yan said with conviction, "Borrowing books. You borrow, you meet him once. You return, you meet him again. Borrow, return, borrow, return. Eventually it becomes natural. Once it becomes natural, everything else is cake." It was for the same reason Dong Hua didn't let Jihan have the fox. Think about it, if Jihan loved that fox, wouldn't she come to visit it often, thereby giving him countless chances? He furrowed his brow and let out a long sigh. Ice Face is extremely cunning. Feng Ju thought about it and, in dismay, once more found that Yan Chaiwu was right. Although she didn't see it back then, the truth was that after Jihan entered Taichan Palace, Dong Hua indeed started to treat her differently. She didn't know then they had shared a bond at Mount Beishui. Everything she knew about the two of them was confined to events on Mount Fuyu, and she discovered nothing unusual from their daily interactions. It turned out she had just neglected to think about the hidden intricacies of the story. 300 years ago, the Jihan who stayed at Taichan Palace was a studious princess. Feng Ju still remembered. While leaning against Dong Hua's feet as he fished by the Pundarika pond, she often saw Jihan run to Dong Hua with an old discolored book in her hand to ask for his explanation on certain passages. Dong Hua happily helped each time. From what she saw, on no occasion did the two overstep their boundaries. But Jihan's studiousness especially helped her along. After being through with annotating the sutras, he sometimes let Jihan borrow them first before returning them to the reverent Buddha of the Western Heavens. He had undeniably indulged Jihan regarding this point. On a lazy summer day in July, Lord Liansong of Wuji Palace brought a small roll of parchment and came looking for Dong Hua. After going round about, he finally admitted that Cheng Yu Yuanjun's birthday was coming up. She had been collecting daggers these days, so he drafted up a new design and wanted Dong Hua to help him make it so that he may present Cheng Yu Yuanjun with a one-of-a-kind saber for her birthday. The unique thing about this saber was that in a close-distance duel, it would act as a short dagger, but in a far-distance battle, it would turn into a long sword. And when overpowered by the opponent, it would have concealed weapons such as hidden poisonous needles. When going hunting, it could change into a bow, in the kitchen, a vegetable knife. In short, carrying this saber was the same as carrying 5 weapons at once: a dagger, a sword, hidden weapons, a bow, and a knife. It was going to be so useful, she'd carry it with her at all times. Liansong also didn't want to create this special saber from magic. He wanted to handcraft the piece so that it would show how genuine his feelings were for Cheng Yu Yuanjun. The problem was that the third prince mainly created mighty weapons to subdue demons such as bells or pagodas, so there was some difficulty for him in making such an intricate dagger. After much thought, he decided that for such a weird object, he would need the weirdo's help. With one hop, Feng Ju leapt onto the desk from Dong Hua's lap. She hopped around on the large blueprint and discovered the design was very masterful. But there were a few rough spots which would leave edges when assembled. They would cause the reputation of Dong Hua's impeccable craftsmanship to be affected. Although Prince Liansong was famous for his smooth ways with the ladies, such fine details were hard for him to detect. Her heart drummed in excitement. She could finally show her ability to him. If she could fix this sketch, Dong Hua would recognize that her talents were no less than Jihan's. At the thought of this, she discreetly placed her paw on the flawed spot lest Lien Song catch it himself. But she was unnecessarily worried. The prince was busy convincing Dong Hua to help him. "You've always been interested in ceramics, haven't you? I found a ceramics town in Suanming's territory in the north. It has the best clay to make ceramics, but Xianming guards it very tightly. If you help me make this saber, I'll draw up a map of that place with the precious clay for you. Xianming won't dare decline if you're the one to ask." Dong Hua unhurriedly poured more tea into his cup. "How about I bring to you the materials and you can make it yourself? It's not as though you don't know Xianming and I don't get along with each other," Lien Song sighed. "I visited his estate one year for a small feast and his young wife somehow took a fancy to me. She wrote love letters to me every day. Xianming still wouldn't let that go." Dong Hua carelessly placed the teapot back on the table. "I've never liked owing others anything. I don't like coercing anyone either." He stroked Fengju's smooth fur and continued, "In coming days, trade all the ceramics in your palace for metals and gems. Then spread a rumor that you're allergic to ceramics. The finer the quality, the more allergic you are. I'm certain Xianming will give you his best porcelains for your birthday this year. Then you can transfer them to me." Lien Song gaped at him for a long time. Dong Hua took a sip of tea and looked up. "Is there a problem?" The third prince forced a smile and shook his head. "No, no problem at all." By the time Lien Song left it was near high noon. Dong Hua poured some tea and brought it to Fengju. She docilely took 2 sips. Dong Hua always gave her good food, good drinks. If she was a pet, then he was a good master. Seeing that she was lying still next to the drawing, he asked, "I'm picking materials to make the saber. Do you want to come?" She decisively shook her head and even flopped onto the drawing sleepily. He caressed her head and stepped out alone. As soon as Dong Hua stepped out the doors, Fengju immediately started to act. She had learned how to use her paws to perform some difficult movements. She rolled the drawing up with her head and claws and used her mouth to toss it onto her back. Then she snuck out of Taichan Palace over to Siming Xingjun's residence, taking care to avoid the young fairies playing by the flower beds. Siming and she lived up to their long-time friendship. From a few gestures, Siming was able to tell what she wanted to do. He took the paper roll from her back and with a few brush strokes corrected the flaws according to her direction. As they were about to roll the drawing up, Cheng Yu Yuanjun arrived for a visit call. She curiously took a look and lamented, "Which crazy person drew up such a weird toy?" Fengju looked to the far distance with sympathy in her eyes and felt for His Highness, the third prince. When Fengju laboriously brought the blueprint back to the study, Dong Hua still hadn't returned. She agilely climbed up the desk, pushed the rolled plot off her back, and unrolled the piece of paper. She wondered how to let Dong Hua know from paw gestures that there were some flaws with the design, that she asked a friend to fix them according to her directions, and whether he was happy with the changes. At this moment, 2 knocks sounded at the door. After a short pause, the door creaked open. Jihan's pretty head poked in. Seeing Fengju on the study desk, the happy princess quickly came in. On her hand was a Buddhist sutra. It was the first time Fengju met a member of the demon clan who was so entranced with Buddha's teachings. Jihan searched far and wide, then came back to stroke Fengju's head. She smiled and asked, "Is Daijun not here?" She turned her head to avoid Jihan's caress, then jumped to the chair next to the study. Jihan seemed to be in a good mood today. She didn't mind Fengju's unfriendly action. She hummed a cheerful tune and took a brush from the brush stand. Then she looked to Fengju as if asking for her opinion. "There's an especially difficult passage I didn't understand today. But Daijun's whereabouts are often unpredictable. Do you think I can leave a note for him?" Fengju turned her head and ignored the princess. Jihan had only dipped the brush into the ink. The brush end still hadn't touched the paper she found on the desk, when the door suddenly opened. The person standing at the door against the sunlight was the very owner of this study, Donghua Daijun. In his hand was a piece of shiny black sheet metal. Paying no attention to the other presences in the room, he headed straight for his desk. At last he glanced over to Jihan, who was hovering a brush over the drawing on the desktop. He held the drawing up and studied it. Fengju's heart threatened to leap out of her throat. Donghua said to Jihan, "Did you add these 2 changes? They're very good." In his voice was an admiration he rarely let shown. "I thought you only read books. I didn't know you knew these things too." It was rare to find someone who understood weaponry, much less a female, thus he generously added, "It's difficult enough to understand Liansong's drawing. But you found 2 flaws on top of that. Your brother was right when he said you were knowledgeable." Jihan's expression was of a dubious nature, but she was nonetheless pleased and leaned in closer to see the drawing. Fengju watched speechlessly as Jihan leaned closer, and yet Donghua didn't try to move away. Instead, he casually handed Jihan the drawing and told her, "Since you understand this, and seem to have an interest in it, why don't you come with me tomorrow when I start forging the saber?" Although Jihan didn't understand the first part, she quite understood the second. She happily agreed. "It's my honor to be able to work with your majesty and learn new things from you." Then she started to show signs of worry. "But I'm rather clumsy. I'm afraid I might inconvenience you." Donghua took another look at the drawing and handed it to the princess. There was still an evident hint of admiration in his voice. "As long as your mind isn't clumsy." Fengju watched in conflicting feelings and anger. Not able to stop herself, she leapt out to take a bite on Jihan's hand. Jihan cried out in surprise. At the same time, Donghua grabbed the scary Fengju, who was still baring her teeth. He frowned and dropped his tone, "Why did you bite her without reason? And she's your savior, too." She wanted to say it wasn't her fault. It was Jihan's for lying. The person who corrected the drawing was she, not Jihan. But she couldn't utter one word. Donghua lifted her to face him squarely. It was something one would do to a pet. They'd never been equals. Suddenly Fengju felt dismal. She thrashed out of his hold and sprinted out of the room. As soon as she left, tears started to fall. Carelessly, she fell over the door threshold. When she turned her head and looked through smeared eyes, she could only see Donghua checking Jihan's wound. He paid no attention to this bullied fox at all. She didn't even bite very hard. She would never behave so atrociously even if she was angry. Jihan was probably oversensitive. Had she known, she would have bitten a bit more lightly. As her chagrin dissolved, sorrow took over her heart. A fox's anguish was still anguish, was it not? Feng Zhu felt that Dong Hua's action clearly showed he was taking Jihan's side. In a dispute, he chose to help Jihan instead of her. He even scolded her first before finding out the truth. Feeling miffed, she retreated her head and curled herself into the flower bush. She was going to pick a farther spot, but she had hoped that Dong Hua would be smart enough to realize he had blamed her wrongly and look for her to apologize. What if he couldn't find her because she had sat too far away? It'd be best if she sat closer in. She dejectedly circled the entire Taichan palace and gloomily chose the sumo bush right in front of Dong Hua's bedchamber. To lie more comfortably, she quietly went to the stream nearby and collected some jixiang grass to make herself a bed. Sad and exhausted, she curled up in the nest and yawned. After fighting sleep a while, her eyelids slowly drooped and eventually closed. When Feng Zhu woke up, the sumo blossoms above her head were rustling in the wind. She dazedly poked her head out and found the sky littered with stars. It was so bright she could see the dusts in the cloud nearby. The Bodhi leaves in the yonder background gave out a throbbing faint green glow against the silent night like enlarged fireflies landing quietly on the palace wall. She sprinted out to see if Dong Hua had returned. When she looked up, his bedchamber a few paces away was indeed lit inside. She again wondered if Dong Hua ever went to look for her. She hopped on the steps and stood on her toes to look inside through ajar doors. With one look, she was paralyzed on that doorway. When she was stargazing just now, the South Star had moved to the 24th sky. From the little she knew about astronomy, it meant it was now past the hour of the pig, past 11 p.m. Even so, Dong Hua didn't seem sleepy yet as he was holding a brush at this time looking as if he was preparing to paint something, a room divider perhaps. But why was Jihan in his bedchamber? Feng Zhu latched herself to the doorway confoundedly, not knowing what was going on. On the glass ceiling beam hung a chandelier which illuminated the entire room as bright as daytime. Within walking distance, a purple-robed man stood in front of an empty virginal canvas while a white-robed woman sat by the desk busying herself with a painting. From afar, they made a picture-perfect mural, one which would have been painted by her own father, the most talented artist of all realms. The chandelier flickered at the entering of a breeze. It should really be exchanged for night pearls. They're bright, natural, and much more stable. But then again, Dong Hua seemed to favor this dark light ambiguity these past few years. In that silent scenery, Jihan all of a sudden rested her brush and tilted her head up to say to Dong Hua, "This place where the sword closes into a box which holds a tube of hidden needles. Of course the third prince's drawing is perfect, I just have a difficult time understanding what this detail means." Dai Jun, as she spoke, she saw Dong Hua flourishing his brush over the white silk canvas, lost to everything else. Falling flowers appeared beneath the bristles, trimming the border of the screen. They were delicate and lifelike, and looked as if they were moving in the wind. The princess paused, then softly changed her way of address, "Teacher." Although her voice was smaller than a mosquito's, Dong Hua heard her nevertheless. He stopped and turned to look at her. Without opposing the new address, he spoke a mere 2 words, "Go ahead." Feng Zhu's sight had always been sharp. Even with the unsteady light source, and even at this distance, she still noticed the blush emanating from Jihan's cheeks when she lowered her head. Jihan brought her eyes down to the shiny reflective floor. "What I meant is, can you stop for just a moment to help me?" Fengju was glad to see how clumsy Jihan was. But her happiness hadn't time to spread when she at once became saddened. She was happy because the thing that troubled Jihan was extremely simple to her, that meant she was smarter than the princess. And she was sad because this was the only thing she was better at compared to Jihan, but even this one credit was stolen. She secretly hoped Jihan couldn't do even something as simple as this. How would Donghua mock her with that personality of his? She waited anxiously for the preceding episode. Unlike what she was hoping for, Donghua didn't say a thing. He only received the brush from Jihan's hand and bent down to draw 2 lines on the blueprint. Then he gently explained, "This is a metal catch. Pushing on it will pull the sword back." Lian Song drew it too roughly. After the short explanation, he raised his head to look at Jihan again. "Understand now?" He seemed patient enough to explain further should she need it. Fengju unconsciously gaped. Occasionally when she was being dim, or when Zonglin did something not to Donghua's liking, he always teased them and bruised their egos as though it was his second nature. But he didn't hurt Jihan's pride, he was so gentle with her. Under the flickering light, when a blushing Jihan nodded her head, Donghua rested the brush on the inkwell and looked at her. Lian Song also drew very roughly those other 2 spots, he remarked. "Didn't you fix those very well, in fact? This one isn't as difficult as those other ones." Flustered, Jihan's rosy cheeks faded some. She replied after a while, "Those 2 spots," she paused, "are lucky guesses." She smiled hesitantly. "I've only read books on my own before, so I only know trivial things. I'm learning so much more from following you now, teacher." The rosy color again returned to her countenance, taking over the ashen paleness. In the stillness, Jihan's eyes came to rest on Donghua's divider screen and they suddenly sparkled. She softly said, "It's late, but I want to finish the drawing tonight so you can start on your work. If I finish tonight, may I have this room divider as a reward?" Donghua seemed a trifle surprised, but agreeably accepted in the end with a simple word, "Yes." At that same moment the bristles touched the stretched white fabric. In a few simple sweeps, a Shanshui landscape emerged with mountain summits behind foggy veil. Jihan laid down the brush in her hand and came over to appreciate his brush strokes. Not able to resist her sleepiness, she covered her mouth and yawned several times. Without pausing from his painting, he told her, "Go back and rest. You can finish tomorrow." "But that will affect your schedule," said Jihan, covering her yawns. She glanced at the divider screen and shyly continued, "I was going to finish my task so that I can take the screen with me." Donghua dipped the wolf fur brush into the water container, exchanging it for a smaller goat fur brush. "What's 1 day's time? When I finished with this screen I'll have Zonglin bring to it you." Even till now, Fengju didn't know how she left Donghua's bedchamber that night. Many people choose to forget the things related to the events which had traumatized them. She guessed she was one of these people. She only remembered she might have returned to her nest and stargazed a while more. In her empty head, she still entertained the question of whether Donghua came to look for her or not. Then she thought to herself, so it turned out Dong Hua was able to say yes if one would just ask. But how come he'd never done so for her? Feng Zhu used to daydream about the day she would meet Dong Hua in her human form, or even the day when he would come to like her. How would they spend their days together? But after seeing him with Jihan tonight, even if such a day came when Dong Hua met her, she thought, it would be just that. Jihan came to Taichan Palace as Dong Hua's bride, to be the one staying by his side. It was Feng Zhu who refused to look at truth in the eye. Would she and Dong Hua ever have that day? For the first time she realized such thing might have been nothing more than a futile dream. Coming to this distant and strange place called Zhukongtian, making that many sacrifices, they weren't to get this sort of ending. She came with sky-high hopes, but now what was she going to do? What was going to be her next step? She had no idea. She only felt tired and exhausted in the chilly night wind. She gazed up to the stars on the sky. It was the first time in 400 years Feng Zhu missed her home. She missed the King Kaihu that was far away, she missed the family she had left behind. The night was beautiful, but how come she was feeling so devastated? Dong Hua didn't come look for her that night, nor the nights after. He used to take her everywhere with him. Was it because he was so lonely, she quietly thought, that he needed to have something, anything, beside him? No matter what it was. Now he had a smart and pretty pupil named Jihan next to him. Not only could she help him with small errands, she could keep him company by talking to him. He didn't need this little fox anymore. The more Feng Zhu thought about it, the more she was convinced that was how it was, and sadness once again took over her being. Jihan and Dong Hua were inseparable lately. Feng Zhu noticed Jihan had a way of charming Dong Hua with her words. For example, if Dong Hua had just finished a fine porcelain wine bottle and was playing with it in his hands, and if she could talk, Feng Zhu would say something inane such as, "This bottle is sure to fetch a good sum of money." But Jihan was different. She lovingly caressed the slender flagon and smiled gently while telling him, "Teacher, if you use crimson stone powder to fire the clay, perhaps the bottle will retain a pretty sunset color." Although Dong Hua hadn't made a reply, Feng Zhu could tell from his expression that he appreciated her remark. She crouched against the grass to watch them for a while more. But the more she watched, the more irritated she became, so she swung her long tail and rose to find a different playground. When she stood up and wobbled on her sleeping limbs, Jihan spotted her right away and quickly rushed over with open arms. Feng Zhu had to admire the princess for not holding a grudge. The sight of her own suspending arms finally reminded Jihan of the bite marks from the previous time. She paused hesitantly. Feng Zhu quietly looked up to her and saw that Dong Hua was also following Jihan over. But because her limbs were still asleep, she couldn't go anywhere, so she lowered her round eyes to the ground and turned her head woundedly to the side. This pose of hers looked so surprisingly adorable that Jihan soon forgot her hesitation and pulled her into an embrace. She caressed the patch of baby fur on top of her head, and, sensing no resistance this time, happily continued to pet the fox. She didn't know it wasn't because Feng Zhu didn't want to resist, she was just too numb to do so. At the same time, Feng Zhu recalled when Jihan had wanted to keep her at the beginning, Dong Hua's rejection had been so terse and cold. Now he just stood by as if it was amusing to watch, even though Jihan was smothering her like this. His treatment of Jihan was indeed changing. Jihan stroked her fur for a while more before lifting her up and asked, I thought you had liked me when we were at the Lotus Sphere. You were so sad to see me go, too. Oh, or do you also feel attached to teacher? But together, both teacher and I can take care of you now. Shouldn't you be happy then? Seeing no response, she assuredly carried her to the pottery station where she had been chatting to Dong Hua. Fengju felt her circulation coming back and wanted to get out of her hold, but Jihan was stronger than she looked. Her hold on Fengju remained tight. She walked to the stone seat and showed Fengju a newly shaped bowl from clay. She happily said to her, This is the bowl teacher and I made especially for you. We wanted to etch a design on it, and then we thought, wouldn't it be interesting if it's your own paw mark? Then she took Fengju's front paw and planted it onto the bowl. Fengju's ego instantly returned after many days of straying outside. Jihan's voice was usually like that of a songbird, but for some reason it was prickly today, especially those lines such as, Teacher and I will take care of you. Teacher and I made you a bowl. Why did she even stay in this form next to Dong Hua and make so much effort only to achieve the position of a pet? She was truly useless. She was a most beloved goddess in King Kaihu. Although King Kaihu's royalty lacked a lot of decorum in the strict eyes of Zhu Kongtian, her dinnerware wasn't any ordinary clay bowl, and she didn't sleep on a nest of hay. Fuming with indignation, Fengju turned her paw and gave Jihan a slash. The claws were sharp and curvy. She also didn't watch her own strength. Jihan was holding her so close that the entire paw came into contact with her cheek, leaving behind 5 long scratches. The 2 deepest ones were now starting to bleed. This time Jihan didn't cry out in pain. She only sat there numbly. Her expression was of an incredulous shock. The newly shaped bowl fell from her hand and got squashed on the ground. The blood on her face oozed out more and more each passing second. The 2 marks already formed 2 small streams trickling down and dyeing her collar a deep red color. Fengju stared uncertainly. Faintly, she realized that in her recklessness, she had created big trouble. With one hand, Dong Hua covered Jihan's injury using his handkerchief. With his other hand, he grabbed Fengju by the nape and lifted her away from Jihan's lap. Jihan finally broke away from her stupor and tremblingly took Dong Hua's sleeve to wipe her tears. I just wanted to befriend her. She then sobbed, Does she really hate me? I thought she had liked me before. Dong Hua frowned as he handed her a handkerchief. Lying low on the ground, Fengju stared confoundedly at his action. How sensitive this person was sometimes, she thought. It must hurt him so to see Jihan's tears flowing over her injured face like this. It must hurt him so, for him to hand her a handkerchief to wipe her tears. There were hastened footsteps approaching from behind. Fengju still didn't bother to see who it was. She only saw Dong Hua turn around to say, She's been too unruly lately. Lock her up. It wasn't until Zonglin bowed reverently in obedience did she understand for whom the word unruly was meant. When Fengju woke from her daze, neither Dong Hua nor Jihan remained. There was only the glowing kill nearby. Zonglin stood motionlessly a meter away from the kill. When he saw cognizance return to her eyes, he sighed and waved her over. Daijun said to lock you up, but he didn't say where and for how long. I couldn't ask what kind of trouble you guys were causing to have tears and blood strewing everywhere either. He sighed again, "Come to my room for the time being." Whenever she caused trouble before, she would bolt the moment her father raised a cane. If she didn't want to be locked up, she could still run away. But she didn't run away, she numbly followed Zonglin on the flower-lined path. An emptiness invaded her soul. She wanted to catch something, but she didn't know what it was she wanted to catch. A butterfly glided before her eyes. She raised her forelimb to slap it away. Zonglin turned around to look and sighed yet again. Sitting in Zonglin's room, Fengju's mood worsened the longer time ticked on. Zonglin let her know that Princess Jihan suffered from hemophilia ever since she was small. A small scrape could lead to heavy bleeding, let alone such a deep cut. After using Dong Hua's best medicines, her condition had now considerably improved. But Zonglin didn't say how long Dong Hua intended to lock her up, or why he hadn't visited her. Did he put her out of mind once she was out of sight? Or did he find another fluffy pet and forget about her? Dong Hua seemed to have many interests: fishing, incense making, pottery, but sometimes she felt he didn't really care about any of those things, so she couldn't tell either if any part of his heart had cared about her. Several days later, Fengju found masses of fur clumping together in rings of mold on her body. It seemed Zonglin couldn't bear to see her bound up either, so he decided on his own to let her out, at the same time remembering to remind her not to cross paths with Daijun so that he wouldn't lose his managerial position at Taichan Palace. Fengju nodded her head as a promise and listlessly stepped out into the sun to sunbathe her fading fur. She couldn't go to any of the places Dong Hua liked to frequent. Without knowing where she was heading, Fengju suddenly heard several idling young servants in conversation. "Whoever loses will have to feed that furry beast today. Anyone who cheats is a turtle." The young servant nodded reluctantly. "Fine, anyone who cheats is a turtle." Then he whispered curiously, "That one-winged snow lion is so scary, yet the Red Demon Lord sent it to Princess Jihan to ride. Do you think the kind and gentle princess can ride such a frightening beast?" The other young servant replied with a knowledgeable air, "Who knows?" But Daijun was especially pleased when the beast was brought into the palace. Fengju had heard Jian once say that Dong Hua liked shiny furry animals. They also needed to appear mighty on top of that. In her empty head, she interpreted the servant's words into the following: Dong Hua had found another pet he liked better. She didn't even have the right to be his pet anymore. 400 years. She had done whatever that could have been done. If this was still the result, didn't it mean Dong Hua and she were never fated to begin with? Fengju dazedly followed along the bank of the blue stream. Soon she saw a row of wooden fence barricading her path. She crawled underneath the small opening and continued along the stream. She abruptly stopped after just several steps. She hid herself behind an ancient apricot tree by the side of the road and hesitated. After a while, she poked her messy head out to look. Standing in the distance was a white lion with only one wing who had arrived at a time unknown to her. And the person standing in front of that unique lion? Dong Hua, whom she hadn't seen in several days. Several rainbow clouds floated above the forest. It was a sign of gathered felicity. She leaned behind the tree to sneak a peek at Dong Hua. He stood next to a flower bush, as straight and beautiful as a sculpted statue. She was miffed, but she missed him. But at the same time she didn't dare to show herself. He was still angry about Jihan's injury. She felt that she was the more pitiable of the two, but since she was the one chasing after Dong Hua, she had to be the one to back down. She had long known this. Next to Dong Hua was an open trunk. A few snow mushrooms poked out from inside. Feng Zhu knew the snow lion was a special beast who only ate mushrooms. But Dong Hua didn't have to feed him ones of the best grade. Even she didn't get to taste these mushrooms yet. He bent down and picked one up. Like lightning, the snow lion, who stood several paces away, leapt forward and devoured the mushroom from his hand. It was gone in the blink of an eye, and the beast burped satisfyingly. Feng Zhu turned around in annoyance. From the corner of her eyes, she saw the shameless snow lion nudging its head in Dong Hua's palm. That act was her special privilege. She fisted her hand mentally. Dong Hua paused a little before stroking its smooth snowy white fur as he had done to her whenever she was being coquettish with him. Feng Zhu felt that she had been lapsing into longer and longer trances these days. This time, when she woke from her trance, both Dong Hua and the snow lion had disappeared. She wiped her eyes, and still there were only the rainbow clouds in front of her. She was debating yet whether it was all a dream when she heard a low taunting voice. "Hey, are you the pet Daijun used to like?" Feng Zhu thought the words "used to" were rather prickly. But she was too depressed to care. She had barely turned toward the direction of the voice when her mind jolted awake. Standing behind her asking that question was the very same one-winged snow lion. It stood quite far from her, but even at that distance, its colossal body blocked away a large patch of sun above her head, pushing her into the shadows of the apricot tree. The snow lion stared down at her with profound interest. With the same taunting voice, it spoke, "I keep hearing from the servants how much Daijun used to like you. I thought you must have been a special fox." It snorted. "But it turns out this is you." Feng Zhu's ego was bruised. She looked down at herself and saw that her fur was indeed shaggy. Then she looked back at the snow lion to see that his fur was brushed smooth and clean. Had she gotten into the situation of being compared to a real pet? Feeling utterly pathetic, she turned around to leave. The snow lion leapt like a whirlwind and barricaded her way. It raised its foot to push her down. Leaving so quickly. Feng Zhu almost got knocked over by the push. She glared back at the immense and unreasonable body stopping her way, but she forgot that she was only a fox in this moment. This angry look was perhaps mighty on a human's face, but its effectiveness on a fox's face was rather limited. The snow lion squinted his eyes and pushed her again. "What? Are you displeased?" Seeing her crawling back up, he pushed one foot down on her chest and pinned her to the ground. He stared down at her tauntingly from above. "I also heard because Daijun liked you, you became so spoiled that you dared injure my mistress Jihan." With another foot, he pressed down on Feng Zhu's two tiny flailing limbs. He said with satisfaction, "My young princess doesn't mind because she is generous. But I'm not generous like her. Consider it bad luck that you see me today." Feng Zhu couldn't hear what the lion was saying after that. Pain shot out from her front limb as her face stung hot when a sharp object poked into her cheek and slashed across it. Pain immediately spread through her entire face. She painfully screamed. But like a fish with an open mouth, she could make no sound. The snow lion unhurriedly raised his blood-stained claws. Drop after drop fell down on Feng Zhu's eyelid. She gasped for breath as her eyes dilated. Her sight was covered in blots of red. The clouds at the end of the sky, the white falling flowers in the distance, all were dyed in a deep red color. The beautiful lion from before was now wearing a coat of red fur. With a surprised expression, he smiled devilishly. "You really are mute like they say." Fengju had heard before about the strength of the one-winged lions. Numerous immortals from Zhejiang, old and young, had tried to capture one to tame into their riding animal. Only Tianjun's youngest prince captured one in recent years, and he gifted it to his nephew, Lord Yehua. But Lord Yehua wasn't much interested in rare riding animals. He negligently left the coveted beast in Tianjun's hunting grounds. Fengju knew her own strength. Although she was originally a fox, all her magic was practiced under her human form. Many of the powerful spells needed to be conjured using fingers. In her current shape, their strengths were too different, and it was unwise to take him on. The snow lion patted her injury-laden face with his claws. Fengju wasn't able to cry to lessen her pain. She wondered if Jihan was feeling the same pain that time. Probably not. Her strike wasn't intentional, and her claws much smaller. They would never be as sharp and ruthless as this lion's. The lion seemed to be greatly amused. Like a cat playing with a terrified mouse under its paws, he again slapped on her right bloody cheek. "Are you still hoping that Daijun will come here to save you? Did you gain his sympathy with this same pitiful look back then? But take a look, now that there's a rare animal like myself here, why would Daijun still like you? His Majesty and the princess come to visit me every day ever since I arrived here, but they never mentioned the mutt that is you once. I heard the maidservants say the king had you locked up for a long time now," it broke out laughing. "Ah, from what I know, Daijun didn't say to free you. How did you come out here?" Fengju knew this sort of vicious beasts like to have other animals submit to it. The greater she put up a resistance, the more it'd torture her. With its eccentric temperament, it was possible that it would torture her until she died. There was a saying, "Death can be as light as a goose feather, or as weighty as the Tai Mountain." If a Bai descendant were to die here today in such fashion, she wouldn't even have the right to an ancestral tablet in King Kaihu. Fengju lay on the wild field with faint gasps of breath. She didn't understand why, as a goddess, she had run all this way to Zhejiang and got herself into this situation. Jihan had Donghua to protect her and a loyal snow lion to avenge her. But her own loved ones from King Kaihu knew nothing of her suffering. The lion slapped her around a while more, then getting no response, lost his interest as expected. He scoffed, used his claw to lift away the trinket on her neck and airily walked away. That trinket was a piece of white jade Donghua put on her the day he brought her back to Zhejiang. It went well with the color of her fur, and she had liked it very much, never letting anyone touch it. Not only did the lion touch the jade, he even stole it away. Yet she couldn't do anything about it. She could only endure the misery silently. She looked to the floating clouds on the sky. Her eyes started to burn and hot tears flowed down from their corners. Love chasing love, was this painful? Fengju lay on the grass for a long time. The pain tore from her wound and sucked away all her energy. She could only hope someone would pass by to take her home and give her some pain reliever. But the sun was now gradually shifting to the west, it was going to be dark soon. She then remembered, this was a deserted field, who would be so leisure as to pass by? The night sky turned darker by the minutes, the air turned chillier by the seconds. Fengju's body altered from feverish to cold. Her once lucid mind weighed heavily. Although her limbs had become numbed, the numbness helped alleviate the pain and she was able to crawl a little faster. It was still hard to get out of this woods before it turned completely dark and she could ask to be sheltered in someone's home. It was very likely she would die here tonight. The more she worried, the less she paid attention to directions. She couldn't tell where she was crawling to anymore, her head now sluggishly torpid. Out of nowhere she fell over in a splash. She flailed about frantically and choked on some mouthfuls of water. Then a sudden taste of blood flooded her mouth, her eyes darkened, and she fell into unconsciousness. According to Siming, he had just finished his supper that day. After brushing his teeth, he went to brew a pot of tea gifted to him by a certain fairy from the lower realm. Taking advantage of the clear moonlit night, he thought of bringing a chair out to the lotus pond to cast a line. One took his bait the moment he threw it down and the line was heavy when he tugged on it. He was excited at the thought that he might have caught a one-in-a-lifetime catch, but when he reeled it in, on the hook was a small dying fox. This small fox was, of course, Fengju. Fengju stayed at Siming's estate for 3 straight days. He had had to go to his colleagues and used up all his favors asking for medicines in order to treat her. There were topical treatments and there were comestible ones. Remembering that Fengju had always been afraid of bitterness, Siming consistently added honey into the elixirs so she could easily take them. Thanks to the magical medicines, Fengju's injuries healed quickly. After 3 or 4 days she was able to step down from her bed. Holding the Book of Fates in his hands, Siming repeated the question he had asked her countless times before, "Your Highness, I genuinely want to know. For such a powerful goddess, what did you do to yourself to fall into this wretched state?" But her mood was foul these days, so she didn't care to reply. There were days when Fengju wrapped herself in a blanket, lost in thoughts. Clouds drifted outside the window panes, fairy cranes sang their graceful hymns. But her mind was in a tangle. This love of hers which had lasted for more than 2,000 years, was it finally time to let it go? She really was at her utmost end. More than 400 years ago, when Siming was but a menial official whose job was to select helpers for the many palaces on heaven, she had asked him to bring her into Taichan Palace as a maidservant so she could be near Donghua. Afraid her parents would find out their daughter had lowered herself to become a maid on Zhuangtian, she pleaded to Jian for him to take away the phoenix mark on her forehead. When she left, Jian even encouraged her, "Princess Fengju is so pretty and clever, and even knows how to cook. Even if cold Donghua can resist your beauty and kindness, he won't be able to resist your cooking. Don't worry about anything, your uncle Bai Zhen and I will be here to back you up." She rode away on clouds with the highest of hopes. But days turned into months and months into years, and still Donghua paid her no attention despite living in the same palace. That meant she should have taken into account the lack of fate at play. If they were fated at all, they would have been like the gentlemen and ladies in those screenplays Auntie Bai Qian kept. Even if they had lived skies apart, one on the 36th level of heaven and the other on the 18th level of hell, the sky would have split to allow the gentleman to fall precisely where his lady was. It wouldn't be as difficult as her and Donghua's situation. When she became a little fox, she was finally able to near Donghua. She could have asked for her fur back from Nichuan before their contracted time was up with the help of either her uncle Bai Zhen or Jian, but Dong Hua seemed to like the little fox so much. He had always turned a cold eye to the ladies, she witnessed it herself. She knew she wasn't any more special than those other goddesses and fairies. If she went back to her human form, Dong Hua might very well push her away too, and then those 400 years would have gone to waste. Of course, she couldn't stay being his pet forever. She would have to tell him eventually that she was Fengju, the young goddess from King Kaiyu. But she wanted to wait until they're a bit closer, and closer still. Unfortunately, that day never came. Out of the blue, Jiahun showed up in Taichan Palace. Perhaps this was another example of how ill-fated she and Dong Hua were. At this moment, Siming came to give her medicine as usual. From the day she fell into this misery, Siming began to wear a perpetual odd scowl. Sometimes it was marked with a certain sympathy, sometimes anger, sometimes irritability. Today, as if he was put under a spell, he changed his attitude and started to tease her. His handsome face was one that was even sterner than her own father's. His beautiful long eyes, which were always twinkling with jest, were now gloomy. Fengju couldn't help giving him 2 glares, and, shuddering, crawled under the blanket. Siming transferred the medicine into a small golden mortar and pulverized it with a pestle. He then took out a spoonful, added some sugar, and brought it to her mouth. Fengju stared at him questioningly. Siming silently looked back at her. "This medicine can't be mixed with water, you have to swallow it dry. Wait an hour before drinking any water." Then he took some tangerines from the plate bedside, peeled them, and gave a piece to her. "If it's bitter, take some tangerine with it." Fengju raised her paw to receive the tangerine. Lowering her head to lick her medicine, she heard Siming sigh as he softened his voice. "I had some time today, so I went to the 13th sky and asked around about you. They said you injured the princess of the Southland, so Dong Hua locked you up? Your injuries weren't caused by her retaliation, were they?" Fengju paused from licking her medicine. She softly shook her head. Siming then said, 2 days from now is Dong Hua's wedding, supposedly to the demon princess who was injured by you. What do you plan to do?" Fengju dazedly stared at the tangerine wedge in her paw. She knew they were going to get married, but she didn't think it would be so soon. She lifted her head to look numbly at Siming. The things she wanted to ask hadn't started to show in her eyes when Siming caught on. "No one was looking for you, it seems they don't know you are missing." Fengju lowered her head and continued her task of picking at the tangerine's veins. Siming suddenly raised his hand and touched her forehead. His action was somewhat crossing decorum, but his hand was warm on her cold forehead. With tear-filled eyes, she looked at him in bewilderment. She felt his hand gently caressing her head as if to give her some comfort. After which he asked, "Do you want to go back to King Kaiyu?" She nodded. He asked, "You're giving up on this love that you've chased for more than 2,000 years, Your Highness?" Again, she nodded. He asked, "Do you want to see him one last time?" Yet again, she nodded. Each of Siming's questions felt like one from her own self, as though there existed 2 of her, one strong and one weak. The stronger self was forcing the weaker to come to an ultimatum for that love story. It hadn't been easy for her to persevere to this day. She was able to hang on until now only because there hadn't been anyone else next to Dong Hua's side. Her love for him had been of a beautiful, steadfast kind. But he was intended for matrimony soon, becoming someone else's husband. Were she to cling on to her one-sided feelings, she'd be turning something beautiful into a resentful insistence. A King Kaya girl could never demean herself like that. She was young, and could afford to be foolish, but things had come to a point where she shouldn't keep digging her heels in. Otherwise, life might become even more miserable, and she had a lifetime ahead of her. Why should she subject herself to prolonged misery? She carefully split the tangerine and handed Siming half of it. Her pupils were now clear within her tear-free eyes. Siming took the tangerine from her and, after a long while, softly said, "All right. When you're a bit better tomorrow, I'll take you to go see that person." In Fengju's memory, her meeting with Dong Hua happened on a breezy day. Well, she didn't really meet him. Siming carried her in his arms and together they snuck into Taichan Palace using an invisible spell so that she could watch Dong Hua from afar for one last time. It was at a small garden Dong Hua often visited. Lush green leaves adorned boundless multicolor lotuses inside the pond. On the water surface was the hexagonal pavilion constructed from white sandalwood that was made especially for her to keep cool. But at this time, the ones sitting inside were Princess Jihan and her one-winged snow lion. A gold brocade parchment was laid on the crystal tabletop. With a brush in her hand, Jihan was transcribing something. The snow lion knelt docilely by her feet 2 steps away. Pain instantly resonated throughout Fengju's body like a reflex. After quickly finishing one page, Jihan beckoned the lion close. That ferocious beast turned out to be very obedient. He quietly waited for his mistress to spread the sheet of Suanzi parchment on his back for the ink to dry. Then, he nudged his head lovingly against her hand. Feeling ticklish, Jihan turned and giggled to Dong Hua, who was sitting outside by the lotus pond and playing with a short dagger in his hand. "It seems Suoying is hungry again. The snow mushrooms are with teacher. It's not his meal time yet, but can't we feed him just one?" Fengju made a mental note of the snow lion's name, so it was called Suoying. Next to Dong Hua's feet was indeed a wooden chest full of smooth and shiny mushrooms. Suoying was a well-behaved pet. Hearing Jihan's words, he did not immediately lunge before Dong Hua like last time. He stretched his back to keep the piece of paper balanced and gracefully walked down each step of the pavilion. Afterward, he slowly ate the mushroom from Dong Hua's hand while gazing up to look at him with big grateful eyes. Jihan was pleased with her pet's manner. Fengju sat in Siming's arms to watch the composition before her eyes. Putting aside all petty thoughts, she could objectively see what an excellent and harmonious picture they made: a handsome master, a beautiful mistress, and a beloved pet to the both of them. Even she had to admire such a scene. Fulling flowers were in season. Like masses of tiny ringing bells, they quivered in the wind and threatened to fall at any moment from the bough. Branches on which they hung. Fengju slightly squirmed within Siming's hold. He softly asked her, "Do you want to go back?" The two were about to leave when out of the blue a bright flash accompanied by the sound of whistling wind flew past them. It drilled into the fulling trunk nearby. Fengju held her breath and stared at the painted picture in the purview ahead. Within the snowy deluge of flying petals, an elegant and regal purple silhouette was placidly striding toward them. She had been with him always, but this was the first time she had a chance to take a close look at this mannerism of his. Holding her breath yet, she watched him come to the fulling tree and flake away fallen petals on the sword. Quietly, he held a cut petal up to the pale sunlight and studied it. This must be the dagger Liansong asked him to make for Cheng Yu Yuanjun's birthday, she thought. Dong Hua might be testing the weight and speed of the sword right now. If the sword was too heavy, its speed would be too slow and the wind speed generated by it would only blow fulling petals without cutting them. He studied it engrossly in a way she was only too familiar with. To Fengju, this was his most beautiful countenance. He removed the sword from the tree and again a shower of petals came sprinkling down. The gossamer confetti swirled in the air with each of his movements. Fengju held her paw out to catch the scattered petals on her sharp claws. She dazedly stared at the damaged fragments. When she looked up again, the purple silhouette had retreated far away from her field of vision, fading gradually behind the dancing curtain of white fullings. They were so close, she thought, and yet he saw her not. But what had Dong Hua done wrong? He never knew she was Fengju of King Kaiu. He never knew she loved him. He couldn't have known the sacrifices she made and the efforts she put into having him either. They just weren't fated. Love couldn't be achieved from efforts alone. She knew this, and knew they weren't meant to be, but she was still overwhelmed with regrets. Questions and answers filled her mind, they were from the dialogue between her strong self and her weak self. Siming petted her head and turned around with a sigh. Fengju could still hear that dialogue ringing by her ears now. Are you sad to say goodbye? What is there to be sad about? We'll surely meet again one day. Even if that day comes, you'll never look at him with these feelings again. I've already tucked away everything that's important into my memory. Wouldn't it be his loss to lose my love? He should be the one feeling sad. For some reason, teardrops nevertheless fell from her eyes onto the fulling petals on her paws. Despite herself, she turned around once more. Through teary eyes, still only scattered petals filled the sky. The boundless landscape was at a standstill with silence. She gazed at the petals in her paws again and again, then curled herself within Siming's arms and faintly fingered a question, will everything be all right from now on? He stopped for what felt like an eternity. His hand again crossed rightful boundaries to soothe her forehead as he replied her, yes, Your Highness, everything will be okay. The following morning was the 13th of September. Astrology deemed it to be a good day for weddings, worship, openings, and sweeping homes. The 13th celestial heaven at long last rejoiced in Dong Hua Daijun and Princess Jihan's wedding. The unprecedented grand ceremony previously imagined turned out to be very low-key. There was some festivity outside of Taichan Palace, but there was no movement elsewhere on heaven. It was just like Dong Hua's ways of doing things. Fengju was going to leave Zhuangdian that very night. Before leaving, she asked the cook at Siming's estate to roast a few yams for her. Carrying them on her back, she quietly circled the 13th sky and left the bag in front of Taichan Palace's gates. It was a gift for Dong Hua's wedding, and also the last tribute to their attachment. She promised to remember the care he had given her the past few months. Not having anything precious to give, she hoped the yams would reach Dong Hua. Would he think of this little fox when he saw them? But, if he didn't, then it didn't matter either. The bright moon hung high above. The sound of merry music drifted outside from within the palace. Feng Zhu felt a calmness at this time. She was neither happy nor sad. There was only an ineffable feeling slowly drowning her, like the time she accidentally fell into the water after meeting the one-winged snow lion. In the end, she didn't know what this emotion was. As for Dong Hua's only romance throughout these thousands of years, Feng Zhu had an idea why Yan Chaiwu had called it an unfortunate affair. Dong Hua liked Jihan, and they were but one step away from their happy ending. Yet at that very last step they turned and parted from one another. On their famous wedding night, the new bride Jihan all of a sudden went missing. In her place, it was Princess Jihe who donned the auspicious red outfit. Moreover, Feng Zhu was the one to discover this fact before anybody else. When she brought the roasted yams to Taichan Palace, Jihe in the red gown cornered her against a palace wall and prattled on about some nonsensical things. With farcical reasoning, she even fooled Feng Zhu into believing that she and Dong Hua still had a chance at their own happy ending. It had felt fishy, Feng Zhu now recalled. But in any event, Dong Hua was getting married soon. Whether he married Jihan or Jihe made no difference to her. She didn't know if anguish had numbed away the injuries she sustained or not, be it on her body or mind, but her heart strangely did not ache this time. Fanyan Valley. In the blistering heat accompanied by occasional sounds of the cicadas, Yan Chaiwu became more and more charged as he went on, although no one really knew why Jihan went missing on their wedding night. Reportedly she had ran away with her bodyguard Minsu. He guffawed again. Imagine how embarrassing it is for your new bride to run away with another man on your wedding night. That was some crappy luck Ice Face had, wasn't it? What a shock. After she left Zhuangdian that night, she never asked about Dong Hua again. But while she was befuddled to hear this from Yan Chaiwu, his story was somewhat doubtful. From what she saw during her stay at Taichan Palace, Jihan's sentiments regarding Dong Hua was those of utter admiration. She didn't seem to have treated Dong Hua as only a front to hide her feelings for someone else. There must be other mysteries behind the story. Clouds increasingly pulled in as the sunlight started to retreat. It seemed it would be raining soon. Feng Zhu raised her head to gaze skyward. She then glanced over to see Yan Chaiwu still chuckling as if he could not stop while she was made gloomy from all these old memories being dug up again. The sight peeved her a great deal, and she couldn't help herself from mocking him. Even a heroic warrior such as yourself fell in love with Princess Jihan. She ran away with someone else. Did she run away with you? And although she hasn't consummated her marriage with Dong Hua, the nuptial rites have been performed, so on papers they're still husband and wife. That means Dong Hua is still better than you. What are you happy about? Yan Chaiwu with an odd expression looked at her. Nuptial rites? I thought you were relations from his palace? How is it that you don't know this? Know what? Feng Zhu asked confusedly. Yan Chaiwu scratched his head. Ice Face didn't marry Jihan. On the day before the wedding he wanted to see his pet baby fox, so he told his housekeeper to bring it to him. Except that was when they discovered it had gone missing. Feng Zhu sprang up suddenly and cut Yan Chaiwu's words. I'm going to check if this fan-shaped boulder can lead us up or down somewhere. It's tiring to be trapped here. Warrior Xiao Yan, you must be tired from talking all this time. I think it's best we start to think of how to save ourselves. You're not listening anymore? But it's interesting. Yan Chaiwu called after her. After only a few steps he caught up to her and rambled on again. I's face rushed out to look for that fox and didn't have time to marry Jihan. What a joke, he even came to my place asking for it. He thought I stole the animal. Do I look like someone who would kidnap foxes? If I was going to kidnap something, it should at least be heavenly maidens. What an insult! I heard he still hasn't found it after 300 years of searching. If you ask me, that fox is as good as dead. I wonder what was so special about it for him to love it that much. After mumbling on and on, Xiao Yan looked up to see Fengju kneeling by the cliff. The boulder which was lodged between the mountainsides where she was stepping on appeared to be unstable. He quickly warned her, "Be careful." His high-pitched and sudden call surprised Fengju, causing her to lose her footing. With 2 drops of sweat rolling down his temple, Yan Chaiwu lurched after her. End of chapter 6.